it sounds like the rocket that's more ballistic would make more sense than going hypersonic through the atmosphere, because you have the speed up and speed down problem, kind of like light speed. When you go from like Earth to Alpha Centauri, a huge component of your time is speeding up and slowing down. So if you could just, I guess that's a poor analogy, but at the same time, it sounds like even though ballistic is like a roundabout way to get there, it's the most efficient way to get there, and it takes less time. If you were just like Earth to Earth travel.
I mean, if you're doing it on pure time, and you want to travel something like half the distance of this planet, sure. A rocket is arguably the fastest way. It is absolutely, I will, you can look this up. It's called ISP. It is a measure of how efficient an engine is. A rocket engine is the most inefficient way humanly known as any kind of real engine to generate any kind of force. It is the least efficient engine you will ever use. Fundamentally, physically, because of the way it functions. It has the ISP of a rocket's generously for a hydrogen rocket is maybe 400. If you want to get nuclear about it, it goes up, but it ain't great. If you compare that to the ISP of any other engine, I mean, like a transatlantic jet engine is orders of magnitude. Its ISP is orders of magnitude higher than a rocket engine. But a rocket engine is faster. That's why we use them, right? I mean, they are very, very good at providing enormous amounts of thrust to speed things up and move them around. And that's good. I mean, if you really need to be somewhere in a massive hurry and cost is not an option, or cost is not a concern, which it really is when, I don't know, delivering ICBMs, yeah, you can rocket it. But to what extent you'd want to put a human through that, I don't know. I mean, the G profile, you thought turbulence was bad, like the G profile on a rocket is substantial. And so lots of other considerations come in when people are suddenly involved. And again, if you thought, there are videos of the Starship taking off, right? And windows are shaking.
Yeah.
Hundreds of miles, tens of miles, wherever it was, a long way away.
They just dug a hole too.
Right. Like they dug a big old hole in the floor, right? Where are you? Same problem with the hypersonic. Where are you launching this from? Where are you landing it? Because it isn't where people are. So yeah, I can fly a rocket there, but I can't land in it.
Well, I think it's gonna be like a barge system.
Out. Yeah, maybe I jump out or something. I don't know. But it's so expensive to fly a rocket. The problem isn't, okay, do you know how much it costs to launch a used, let's follow this through. So let's say I get in a Falcon 9.
Sure. Right? I think the spaceship is supposed to be even more efficient cost per kilogram than Falcon 9, which is kind of interesting.
Sure, but
it's like 9
is actually flown. So
yes. Yeah, we can use that because it's good math.
And I also don't know its number. I don't know the Starship numbers off the top of my head. And I do agree they're orders of magnitude lower, but still, right? So, and hopefully they manage it. I really hope they do. I really hope they do. Right?
So Falcon 9.
But a Falcon 9, do you know what it costs for a Falcon 9 flight?
It's like 40 million.
Give or take, yeah. Do you know what its cargo
is? To ISS, right? Is it 40, I think it's 40 million to ISS and back, right? With like 4 to 6 passengers.
It's basically 50 million a launch, and what changes is the cargo. So if you go to like 200 kilometers LEO, your cargo goes up. If you want to go to the ISS, I think that's around 300. Cargo comes down, right? Because as you take mass, you add mass in or you take fuel out, whatever you do, right? So, yeah. But it's about 50 million all in, and its cargo capacity. Off the top of my head, what? 10 tons? 20 tons?
Something the magic like of Google.
Yeah, I'll let you look that up in the background, right? So,
cargo capacity. Yeah, I have a new setup so I can Google things so that we don't have to.
Nice.
It's 55,000 pounds, so it's like 25,000 tons, I think.
25 pounds. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I did that math wrong.
So there you go, right? So that, I mean, and that's the cheapest.
That just really isn't that much, yeah.
To my knowledge, for a reused Falcon 9, that is the cheapest cargo to space it's currently good. Barring the Starship, but that blew up, right? So, and look, hey, they're going to do it. I believe they're going to do it. It's just a matter of time. They got some bugs to fix, clearly, but I think they'll get there. I'm not really concerned.
Yeah. Nothing else can. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So, do you know what it costs to build an A380?
I don't know what an A380 is.
An A380 is the largest transatlantic civilian passenger plane. So full double-decker transatlantics by Airbus. The most expensive civilian plane that within transit.
I imagine it's like several million to like 20 million. The big ones, like a 747.
The most, yeah, it's basically the most expensive transatlantic aircraft you can buy, right? If you're an airline, if you're like American Airlines or like Virgin Atlantic or whoever, and you're buying aircraft, it's the most expensive one you'll ever buy. And the Falcon 9, again, 40-50 million at launch, right? How much are you betting for the A380 or a 747 or whatever?
For the cost of the vehicle, or for me to go from point A to point B with a ticket?
The cost of the whole vehicle, which will be more expensive, not a single the cost of the whole vehicle.
I would assume it's less than 50 million.
It's $360 million.
Okay, never mind.
And that doesn't include the cost of the engines, because most airlines don't buy the engines. They're so expensive and complicated. They rent them. That aircraft has 4. Each one of those engines is about 10 million each, as I recall. So that's another 4. It's about 400 million all in for that vehicle to be built. Now, I can get on that aircraft and I can fly to the UK, which is at 10,000 miles return, off the top of my head, there and back. I can do that for about $1,000, which is a more expensive vehicle and a longer distance, because space is only 200 miles up.
Yeah.
Well, technically it's 100 miles up, but good luck staying in orbit there, right? But if you actually, a sustainable orbit's probably 200 or so miles away, a bit more. It's not.
They can drive there in like 3 to 4 hours.
If a car could drive up, you're entirely right. I mean, I live in Texas, right? That's not even a far. People will go that far for brunch.
Yeah.
Right. But you can't. The only way there is a rocket, and that's why we use them. They are painfully inefficient, but nonetheless the only way to do that.
Is there? I'm sorry. I suspect that you're going with a point. Are you? I don't want to interrupt. Are you going somewhere? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So,
I'm excited.
The point. What's the difference then, right? Why is, because also most of that plane, half of that plane ticket, the $1,000 plane ticket, half of it is tax, and then the remaining chunk of it is fuel. Like a good another of the $1,000, like I said, $500 tax, about another $300-400 fuel. God knows what they charge me for the coffee, right? I did the math once. The cost per ticket of that aircraft is about $20. Right. And the reason for that is that A380 or that airliner will fly on average 36,000 times. Right. A rocket is very unlikely to fly that number of times ever. I'll give it to SpaceX. They've done a really good job taking a vehicle that only ever flown once and getting it up into the tens of flights. And they don't seem to have had any problems really doing that. There have been very few explosions, which is impressive. But the idea that they're in the tens at some point, I think they'll break the hundreds. They'll get into the hundreds. I am hopefully skeptical they'll break the thousands, but I wonder if they really will, just because of the nature of the way those engines work. A rocket engine is so painfully inefficient, you basically have to redline it, right? That's how you get to orbit, is you just jam the rocket engine into max, and you pray it doesn't explode, right? It's like driving everywhere in first gear at 7,000 RPM. That's what a rocket engine represents, right? They're so inefficient that the only way to get anywhere with them is to stage them. No other vehicle do you get in where you drop bits of it along the way, right? If you were in the plane, the captain said, well, I came over the intercom, right then, passengers, we're halfway through the fuel, so we're just going to be dropping the, half ends of the wings into the ocean now because we don't need them anymore. No, you don't do that. You take it all the way to the next place. You land and you fill it back up. Even though as the plane drains fuel out of the wings, I don't dump the wings into the ocean or any other part of the aircraft for that matter. The air hostesses don't kick the empty coffee containers out the window, right? Because we're done with them now and it's extra mass we don't need. But on a rocket, you do that, right? As you burn through the main stage, you kick it off, right? Elon relands them so he can reuse them again. Before, the cost was astronomical because you threw the whole thing in the ocean, and that was that. Going to space could easily be cheaper than going to another country in terms of the distance traveled. The problem is the cost of the vehicle and how many times it flies. If you can get a rocket to fly 36,000 times on a single rocket with very little maintenance, as they do with aircraft today, it lands, you refuel, it takes off, which is incredibly what Musk is aiming for, SpaceX at least. Musk is too busy, of course, running Twitter, but at least right now. But assuming they put it off, and I think they'll get it flying, but to what extent that vehicle will fly 35,000 times to me is very questionable.
That's fair.
I think it won't, but I see absolutely no proof that it will. It might. Physics might do that for you, right? But you're in uncharted waters now. The most anyone has launched the same rocket is tens of times, and you're telling me that you're going to do 100 times better than that. That's like saying, what's the world record on height jumped by a human? And you're like, it's whatever it is, 2 meters, 4 meters, whatever, right? And you say, great, I'm going to do 400. And you're like, well, maybe, but some things just won't go much further. So and SpaceX haven't hit a wall yet, or no one has, as far as I'm aware, on how many times you can reuse a rocket engine. But there is presumably a point of diminishing returns, as there is with all technologies, right? Mm-hmm. An internal combustion engine in a car will always struggle to get an engine over about 200 miles an hour. That's why all the land speed records are done with jet engine powered cars, where the engine just can't do it. Yeah. And so somewhere in there is the number of times you can launch a rocket engine before it just starts exploding, and that's going to be really hard to get any further. And so you can chase that to Land's End, or you can do the hard work of figuring out the physics to have a space plane, right? Because a plane takes off horizontally. It's a much more efficient way of generating lift. And then if you look at something like reaction engines, who have the Sabre engine, who are building a single stage. I suppose for those that don't know, a single stage to orbit vehicle is basically the space shuttle that takes off from a runway as well, right? It's a plane. It looks like a plane, takes off from a runway, goes to space, comes back down, lands in a runway, right? That's a single stage vehicle. You don't drop any of it into the ocean on the way. Not even little bits, not even the crisp packets. Keep everything, right? The coffee cups, the whole thing, the K-cups, the going to recycling. We're environmentally responsible now, right? So if you have that vehicle, and if you can have, which flies more efficiently, right? This is the deal. Plane, if you think of the plane, right, it generates lift with its wings. It uses the engines to pull the plane forward. That's what the engines do. They only pull the plane forward, really. The wings generate all the lift. It is a much more efficient way of generating lift than simply pointing an engine at the floor. And you know this because a standard transatlantic jet cannot hover. If you put that to max, if you put the engines to max thrust, you can't hover the plane, it just falls to the floor. The engines cannot put enough thrust out to lift the plane off directly. You have to go sideways and use the wing. It's considerably more efficient. And so that's what a space plane offers, is much higher efficiency. And then with that efficiency comes the luxury of keeping all the stuff that you only needed at one point, right? You don't have to throw it out the window. And then because it's more efficient, the engine gets red light, isn't running as hot, isn't as hard. And then that enables you then to fly this vehicle a much larger number of times, which is kind of where like Virgin were going, sort of, right? With that, like with the little plane drop thing that kind of rocketed up. That's the direction they were going in. And there's a company called Skylon with Sabre engines. They're kind of trying to do that too. And as other hypersonic companies come up, and have these solutions, you're going to see, and you're starting to see a lot of crossover between companies that were alternative launch companies becoming hypersonic companies and vice versa, because they kind of live in a similar space. And that's why I care, right? All of this is to say it's a matter of cost, right? You can go to space today. It'll cost you about, if you can get a ticket, it's somewhere between 10 and 100 million for an all-in ticket to space. But for me or you to have I don't know about you, but certainly for me to have the ability to go to space, right? It probably needs to be under $10,000 a go if I ever even want to consider the idea, right?
Mm-hmm. That's fair.
And so that to me is what's relevant about space planes. That is really the whole equation. That's what SpaceX are trying to do, right? They're trying to reuse the vehicle because an airplane costs more, flies further than a rocket, right? And carries more people and is still somehow cheaper.
Mm.
And the reason for that is the number of times it flies.
Yeah, that makes sense. For the Concorde, how many times could it fly? Like, what was the cost per ticket for that one?
Yeah, I don't know, actually. I haven't done the math on that. It all comes down to, so the number of flights an aircraft make. Interestingly, actually, I think, or if you're nerdy like I am, but what limits you is, have you ever bent a spoon backwards and forwards a bunch of times until it breaks?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't know about you or any of your listeners. I'm not strong enough to just rip a spoon apart, but I can do the bendy thing until it snaps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a method of failure in metals that's called fatigue. Basically, if you keep bending them a bunch, each time you bend it, it cracks and breaks a little more, cracks a little, breaks more, until eventually it just breaks, right? It's a cyclic failure from loading over and over, loading it up and unloading it, loading it up and unloading it over and over and over again. So each time the plane flies, the cabin gets pressurized. And that actually stresses the whole airframe. And so that's the limiter on how many times an aircraft can fly, assuming you have fairly good safety protocols, because you can fly it more, 36,000 times, then you have to start scanning the whole thing a whole bunch, and like doing like inspections for cracks and all kinds of other things. Most airlines at that point just abandon the plane because the cost of the maintenance outweighs buying a new one. But I don't know what it was for the Concorde, because it got hotter, a lot hotter. In fact, they made a design choice. They intentionally limited the speed of the vehicle so they could make the whole thing out of aluminium. I think it was Mach 1.8 for the Concorde. It could have gotten up to about 2.2, but at that point, you would have been over the working temperature of aluminium. And so they would have had to go on to titanium, which would push the prices up a bunch and blah, blah.